They shoved her to the floor, laughed while food rained down on her, and treated her like she was nothing more than a weak civilian therapist. But the woman they humiliated in that mess hall wasn't weak at all. She was the one person on that base powerful enough to destroy everyone behind the betrayal.
This table is for Marines, not for some weak little shrink who thinks she belongs here. Gunnery Sergeant Omar Reich planted himself in the middle of the mess hall, his arms crossed like steel bars, blocking a woman holding a tray of food. His voice boomed across the crowded room. 50 Marines snapped their heads around. Conversations evaporated. Forks froze in midair. The woman was Dr. Celine Ardon, 32 years old. Her civilian contractor badge was clipped to a simple navy blouse. She'd only been at Camp Lejeune for 3 days, hired as a strategic psychology consultant. No rank, no uniform, and zero apparent authority. She met Reich's glare with unnervingly calm eyes. "I'm just trying to get some lunch," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The gunnery sergeant took a step closer, towering over her by at least a foot. His jaw was clenched, his shoulders squared off. His entire stance was a masterclass in intimidation. "You heard me, civilian. This isn't your space. Women like you have no business in this building. You have no business on this base." Celine didn't retreat. She didn't even flinch. She just stood there, holding her tray, and waited. Reich's lip curled into a nasty sneer as he glanced around at his audience. 50 faces, all watching. 50 potential witnesses to his power. He had to make a point. He drove his shoulder forward. The hit was deliberate and brutal. Celine staggered back, the tray flipping out of her hands. Mashed potatoes went flying, splattering across the grimy floor. Her water glass shattered. She landed hard, the palms of her hands scraping against the rough concrete. And then the mess hall exploded. A wave of laughter crashed against the walls. Marines started pounding on their tables. Someone chucked a dinner roll, and it bounced off Celine's shoulder. Another piece of food followed, and then another. "Go home, civilian," someone yelled. "This is what happens when you wander into places you don't belong. Stick to your little therapy couch." Reich loomed over her, a predator admiring his fallen prey. His chest puffed out with pride, while all around him, his brothers in arms cheered on his display of dominance. This was his house, his territory, and he'd just put an intruder in her place. Celine stayed on the floor for exactly 3 seconds. Then she moved. Her palms pressed flat against the concrete. She engaged her core. With a single, fluid motion, she was back on her feet. There was no wasted energy, no awkward scrambling. It was the kind of practiced recovery you see from someone who has drilled it thousands of times. The muscle memory of an operator trained to get back in the fight, no matter what, just knocked them down. Standing tall, she began to brush the food off her blouse with methodical precision. Left shoulder, then right, then the front. Her movements were clean, efficient. Nobody noticed. Nobody, that is, except for Lieutenant Theo Mercer. The young officer was sitting 3 tables away, his fork still frozen halfway to his mouth, his eyes narrowed, studying the woman. Something about this whole scene was just off. Something didn't add up. A civilian who just got body checked to the floor by a 200-pound Marine should be shaking, or crying, or sprinting for the nearest exit. This woman was doing none of that. Mercer watched her fingers as she straightened her ID badge. The grip was specific index and middle finger at a precise angle. He'd seen that exact grip before, out on the firing range, used by operators who handle weapons for a living. Celine finished cleaning herself up and looked right at Reich. Her face was a complete blank. No fear, no rage, no humiliation. Just a strange patience, like someone waiting for a bus that's a few minutes late. "Are you finished?" she asked. Reich actually blinked. This was not the reaction he was going for. Civilians were supposed to break. They cry, they run away. They don't stand there and calmly ask if you're done bullying them. "What did you just say to me?" he growled. "I asked if you are finished, because I would still like to have lunch." The mess hall fell silent. Even the Marines who'd been laughing a moment ago could feel the atmosphere shift. The air suddenly felt heavy, electric. Reich scrambled to recover. He forced a laugh. "Look at this one. The shrink thinks she's a tough guy." He turned to his audience, spreading his arms wide. "You hear that? She still wants to eat! More laughter followed, but this time it sounded a little forced, a little unsure. Reich stepped right up to Celine, so close she could smell the stale coffee on his breath. Let me make this crystal clear for you, sweetheart. You are nothing here. You've got no rank, no authority, and no right to be breathing the same air as real soldiers. The only reason you're even on this base is because some paper pusher in Washington thinks we need our heads checked. He jabbed a thick finger toward the exit. So take your little clipboard and your little feelings and get out of my mess hall before I make you. Celine held his stare for a long, silent moment. And then she did something completely unexpected. She smiled. It wasn't a nervous smile or a trying to make peace smile. It was the smile of somebody who knows a secret. A secret that changes the entire game. Understood, Sergeant, she said softly. I'll find somewhere else to eat. With that, she turned and walked toward the door. Her stride was calm and measured. Her shoulders were back. She never once looked over her shoulder. Reich watched her leave, a triumphant grin spreading across his face. He threw his arms up in victory, and that, gentlemen, is how you handle civilians. The mess hall roared its approval. Marines slapped him on the back. Someone handed him a fresh cup of coffee. The natural order of things had been restored, but Mercer wasn't cheering. He was staring at the door Celine had just walked through. More specifically, he was watching the way she walked. Heel to toe, weight perfectly centered, arms loose but ready. Therapists don't walk like that. Soldiers do. If you're wondering why a civilian who just got humiliated in front of 50 Marines is smiling instead of crying, you are absolutely asking the right question. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit that thanks button to support us, because what comes next is going to completely flip what you think you know about this woman. The next morning, Selene got to the Base Psychological Services office at 6:45 a.m., a full 15 minutes before anyone else. She swiped her temporary key card, the light flashed green. She stepped inside. The office was tiny, a standard government-issue desk, a metal filing cabinet, and 2 chairs for appointments. A single window overlooked the parade ground, where Marines were already out for their morning drills. She put her bag on the desk, pulled out a laptop, and opened it. Her fingers flew across the keyboard with an easy speed. She wasn't checking her email. She was running a piece of software that had no business being on a civilian contractor's computer. Lines of code scrolled down the screen, encrypted data packets, communication logs. She worked for exactly 7 minutes. Then she closed the program and opened up a standard psychological evaluation form. When her first appointment walked in at 7:15 a.m., she looked exactly like what her badge said she was, a mild-mannered therapist ready to talk about stress management. The Marine who came in was young, barely 20. His name tag read Private First Class Danny Webb. He sat down across from her, his leg bouncing with nervous energy. I don't really know why I'm here, ma'am, he admitted. They just told me I had to show up. Celine gave him a gentle nod. That's perfectly fine. We can just talk. No pressure at all. For the next 45 minutes, she just listened. She asked probing questions. She took notes. She was good at her job, genuinely good. Her questions were insightful, her observations sharp. But another part of her brain was working on something else entirely. It was calculating, analyzing, and mapping the invisible power structures of the base. Who talked to who answered to who was afraid of who. And sitting right at the center of that spiderweb was Gunnery Sergeant Omar Reich. Webb brought him up without any prompting. He's kind of a legend around here, the young Marine said. 15 years in, 3 combat tours. Everybody respects him. Respects him? Celine repeated softly. Or fears him? Webb hesitated for just a split second, but it was enough for Celine to see. Both, I guess. She filed that little piece of data away. At 8:30 a.m., Webb left her office. Celine had 12 minutes until her next appointment. She used them to dig into the personnel files she could access. Reich's file was thick, packed with commendations, awards, and glowing letters of recommendation. But there were also strange gaps, periods of time that were completely redacted. Deployments that listed no specific location. One little note caught her eye, a reference to something called Operation Hollow Mirror. The details were blacked out, but the date was there. 7 years ago. Celine stared at the words, her jaw tightening. The hand resting on her desk slowly curled into a white-knuckled fist. Then, just as quickly, she relaxed it, took a breath, and put her neutral mask back on just as her next appointment arrived. Another Marine, another session, another piece of the puzzle sliding into place. By lunchtime, the incident in the mess hall had already become the stuff of legend. The moment Celine walked into the cafeteria, every head turned. Conversations died. Forks stopped moving. She ignored every single one of them. She got her tray, picked out her food, and headed for an empty table in the corner. But before she could even get there, a group of Marines stood up from their seats and moved to block the table. "Sorry," one of them said, with a smile that wasn't sorry at all. "This table's reserved." Celine glanced at the next empty table. Another group of Marines stood up. This one too. And the next one. Occupied. Soon she was standing in the middle of the mess hall, tray in hand, as every single available seat was suddenly taken. The message couldn't have been clearer. You are not welcome here. From across the room, Rake watched it all unfold. He didn't have to participate directly. His soldiers were taking care of it for him. He just leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, and enjoyed the show. Celine scanned the room, looking at the 50 hostile faces staring back at her. Then she walked over to the wall, placed her tray on a narrow ledge under the window, and started to eat, standing up. She didn't hurry. She didn't try to hide. She just ate her meal, calm and methodical, as if this had been her plan all along. From his table, Mercer watched. The young lieutenant hadn't joined the blockade. He didn't lift a finger to help her, either. He just watched, his mind racing to understand what he was witnessing. The woman polished off her lunch, returned her tray, and walked out of the mess hall. She never so much as glanced at Reich. That fact burrowed under the gunnery sergeant's skin more than he'd ever admit. Over the next 3 days, her isolation became a full-blown quarantine. When Celine walked into a room, others would suddenly find a reason to leave. Her questions were met with clipped, one-word replies. When she needed files for her work, the requests were mysteriously delayed, lost, or sent to the wrong department. She noted everything, every single slight, every roadblock, every petty act of social warfare. Her notebook filled up with notes written in a personal code that looked like regular shorthand but was infinitely more complex. On the 4th day, they started attacking her job directly. She showed up at her office only to find her security badge wouldn't work. A system error. The MP at the gate told her, his voice flat, "You'll have to get a new one." "Any idea how long that will take?" she asked. "Could be a couple hours, could be a couple days. Really just depends on how swamped admin is." She was forced to wait for 6 hours in a sterile holding area by the main gate, treated like some common trespasser. When her new badge was finally ready, her security clearance had been knocked down a level. She was now barred from the North Wing, the very section that held all the senior staff offices and secure communication hubs. "Just another system error," the clerk at admin said with a shrug that made it perfectly clear it was anything but. Celine took the new badge without a word of protest. Back in her temporary quarters that night, she fired up her encrypted laptop. For the next 3 hours, she meticulously traced the web connecting Reich to the base's administrative staff, following a breadcrumb trail of favors owed and professional debts that led directly to her access being revoked. The picture it painted was crystal clear. Reich had his people everywhere. It was a network of loyalty he'd spent 15 years building. A quiet word from him, and doors would slam shut. A simple nod, and a promising career could be made or shattered. This guy wasn't just a common bully. He was a kingmaker, and he had decided that Celine Ardon had to go. Then, on day 6, the accusations started. Celine was in the middle of a standard evaluation when a pair of military police officers appeared in her doorway. "Doctor Ardon, we're going to need you to come with us." "May I ask what this is about?" "There's been a report," one said. "Contraband was found in your room." She didn't fight them, didn't even argue. She simply saved her work, shut her laptop, and went with them. Her room had been tossed. The mattress was flipped over. Her clothes were strewn all over the floor. Her personal effects were scattered on her desk. And sitting right there, impossible to miss, was a small plastic baggie with 3 pills inside. Controlled substance, the MP stated flatly. Want to tell us about these? Celine just looked at the pills, her face a perfect mask of calm. They are not mine. They were found in your quarters, ma'am. I understand that, she replied evenly. They are still not mine. The MP shot a look at his partner. They'd clearly been expecting a tearful denial. What they hadn't been expecting was her total and complete lack of fear. You'll have to come with us for questioning. Of course. She then spent the next 4 hours in a stark interrogation room. They hit her with the same questions over and over, trying to trip her up, trying to grind her down. She answered every single one with the same unnerving, calm precision. Her story never wavered. Her composure never broke. Finally, a new officer walked in, someone she hadn't seen before. He wore the insignia of an intelligence officer and had the cold, calculating eyes of a man who missed nothing. Major Isaac Vaughn, he introduced himself. He sat down across from her and just studied her for a long, silent moment. Dr. Ardan, your background file is unusual. Oh, she said, most of our civilian contractors have pretty cut and dry records. You know, education, work history, a list of references. Yours, on the other hand, is full of holes. My previous work involves some sensitive projects, she explained. I'm bound by confidentiality agreements. That's what the official file says, he conceded, leaning forward slightly. But when I tried to verify some of those projects, I hit walls. And I'm not talking about classified stamps. I'm talking about walls that shouldn't even exist for a simple psychology consultant. Celine held his gaze. I can't really speak to the inner workings of your verification system, Major. No, I don't suppose you can, he said, standing up. He walked to the door and paused. The contraband charges are being dropped, not enough evidence. Looks like whoever planted them got sloppy. I appreciate you clearing that up. Don't thank me yet, Dr. Ardan. I still have questions about you. Questions I fully intend to get answers to. And with that, he was gone. Celine sat alone in the room for another 10 minutes, processing, recalculating, and adjusting her internal timeline. Vaughn was a wild card she hadn't completely accounted for. A sharp intelligence officer asking all the right questions could make things very messy. But then again, a complication could also be an opportunity. News that the charges had been dropped spread like wildfire. Reich was livid. How, he roared at his inner circle, huddled together in the motor pool where no one could overhear them. I had that setup locked down. I had 3 separate witnesses who saw those pills in her bag. The witnesses backed out. One of his men mumbled, said they weren't so sure what they saw anymore. That's impossible, Reich shot back. I chose those guys myself. Well, somebody got to them, the man replied. Somebody with more pull than you. Reich's face grew dark. For years, he had run this base like it was his own private kingdom. The very thought that someone else here might have more influence than him was unbearable. Find out who it was, he snarled, and find me another way to get her gone. His men looked at each other nervously. Finally, one of them dared to speak up. Sergeant, why do you care so much about some civilian shrink? She's a nobody. Reich turned, his movements slow and deliberate. His eyes were like chips of ice. Because, he said, his voice low, after I knocked her on her ass in the mess hall, she looked at me. She looked at me like I was nothing. Like I was a bug she was going to squash later. He jabbed a thick finger into his subordinate's chest. Nobody looks at me like that. Nobody. Especially not some pencil-pushing civilian who thinks she has any right to be here. The soldier nodded frantically. Understood, Sergeant. Good, Reich grunted. Now get out of my sight and make her life a living hell. I want her gone from this base by the end of the week. Day 7 brought a new line of attack. Celine's evaluation reports were suddenly rejected. Every single one of them. Each assessment she had submitted for the past week was sent back, stamped with insufficient documentation. I used the standard template, she told the administrative officer calmly. New guidelines just came down from command, the officer replied, without meeting her eyes. Your reports don't meet the updated standards. What? Updated standards? The officer just shrugged. That's above my pay grade. You're going to have to do them all over. 7 days of meticulous work, wiped out by a single bureaucratic stamp. Celine simply collected the rejection notices without a flicker of emotion, went back to her office, and prepared to start over. But when she tried to log into her computer, she found a new roadblock. Her access to the entire psychological evaluation database had been revoked. Without that, she couldn't file a single report, new or old. She leaned back in her chair and stared out the window at the distant parade ground. The walls were closing in. Every day, they cut off another path, took away another tool. The message couldn't have been clearer. Get out on your own, or we'll force you out. A sharp knock on her door snapped her out of her thoughts. Lieutenant Mercer was standing in the doorway. He looked nervous, like he was torn about being there. Dr. Arden, could I have a minute? Of course, Lieutenant. Come on in, she said. He stepped inside but remained standing, closing the door behind him and lowering his voice. I need to ask you something, and I really need you to be straight with me. Celine just waited. Back in the mess hall, he began, after Sergeant Reich shoved you, the way you got back up, the way you moved. He trailed off, struggling to find the right words. It wasn't normal. It wasn't how a civilian gets up. What are you trying to say, Lieutenant? I'm not trying to say anything, he insisted. I'm asking, who are you, really? Celine studied him for a long moment, this sharp young officer with his observant eyes and his very inconvenient questions. I am exactly who my file says I am, Lieutenant, a civilian psychology consultant. About your file, Mercer said, pulling out his phone. I tried to run a deeper background check on your credentials. It's standard procedure for civilian personnel. Do you want to see what I found? He turned the screen toward her. It displayed a stark warning message in red letters. Access denied. Red Omega classified. Do not attempt again. Red Omega, Mercer whispered, his voice full of awe and confusion. I've been in the service for 6 years. I've never even heard of a classification called Red Omega, and I have sure as hell never seen it attached to a civilian contractor. Celine looked from the screen to his worried face. Where did you access this? A base security terminal? Yeah, I have clearance for contractor background verification. And now, she said softly, you have a permanent flag on your service record for trying to access highly restricted information. Mercer's face went white. What? That warning isn't just about my file, Lieutenant. It's about you. Whoever is in charge of monitoring Red Omega assets now knows you've been poking around. The young officer looked like he was going to be sick. He had never even considered that. Celine stood up and walked to the window, turning her back to him. Lieutenant Mercer, you strike me as a fine officer. You're observant, you're smart, and you're willing to question things that don't feel right. She turned back to face him. Those are admirable qualities. Don't throw them away by digging into things that could destroy your career before it even gets started. But understand this, I am not your enemy. I'm not anyone's enemy on this base. What I am is a person doing a job that, for now, requires me to be exactly who you see. Do you understand what I'm saying? Mercer just stared at her, his mind reeling. None of the pieces fit, but he could suddenly sense the shape of something huge and hidden, something that went far beyond one NCO's petty harassment campaign. Reich, he said, the name sounding small and insignificant now. This has nothing to do with Reich, does it? You're here for something else entirely. Celine's expression remained unchanged, but for a fraction of a second, a different kind of light flickered in her eyes. Goodbye, Lieutenant, she said quietly. I would strongly suggest you forget we ever had this conversation. Mercer had just stumbled upon the truth. The meek civilian therapist had a security clearance higher than most generals. But what is she really after on this military base? Drop your theory in the comments, because you're going to want to stick around for the answer. It changes everything. Day 8. The tension finally snaps. Celine is called in to face an investigative board. The charge? Violating security protocols. The hearing room is cramped, with fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. 3 officers are sitting at a long table. Colonel Patricia Hendricks, is in the center with Major Vaughn and Captain Rodriguez on either side. Celine sits all by herself on the other side. No lawyer, no one to back her up, just her against a mountain of accusations. Colonel Hendricks reads from a file, Dr. Ardon, you're accused of entering restricted areas without clearance, taking classified documents from secure locations, and making unauthorized copies of sensitive personnel files. I did none of those things, Colonel. We have witnesses. Then your witnesses are either mistaken or they're lying. Hendricks glances up from the folder, her eyes sharp and sizing Celine up. That's a pretty serious thing to say, Doctor. So is calling me a security threat without any real evidence. Major Vaughn leans in. Our access logs show you tried to get into the North Wing Communication Center 3 times last week. Tried to? Celine replies, my badge was denied every single time, which you'd see if you read those same logs. Maybe you found another way in. If I had, Celine says, her voice perfectly calm and steady, there would be proof. Security footage, biometric scans, entry logs that show I actually got in, not just that I was denied. There's no evidence like that because it never happened. Far. The officers look at each other. She has a point. They had accusations and they had witnesses, but they didn't have any cold, hard proof. Colonel Hendricks shuts the folder. Dr. Arden, I'm just going to be blunt with you. Someone on this base wants you out of here. That much is clear, Celine says. The only question is whether their reasons are personal or professional. I wasn't aware the two had to be separate, Colonel. A tiny flicker of something crosses the Colonel's face. Maybe respect, maybe just surprise. This hearing is on hold while we investigate further. You are confined to your quarters and the psych office until we say otherwise. And your access privileges are still on lockdown. Is that clear? Crystal, Celine replies. Then you're dismissed. As Celine gets up and walks to the door, Major Vaughn calls out, Dr. Ardon. She stops and turns around. He's staring at her with those cold, calculating eyes of his. I ran your name through every database I could get my hands on. Military, intelligence, federal, even international. He pauses for effect. You don't exist. Not for real. You're a ghost. Just a cover story wrapped up in a bunch of paperwork. Celine just holds his stare. Maybe you're not looking in the right places, Major. Or maybe, he shoots back. The right places are above my pay grade. She doesn't say a word. She just turns and walks out. Behind her, the 3 officers sit in stunned silence. Finally, Colonel Hendricks breaks it. Thoughts? Vaughn just slowly shakes his head. I've been in intel for 12 years. I'm good at reading people, and I can't get a read on her at all. That scares the hell out of me. Should we keep digging? The captain asks. I don't think we should, the colonel says. I think we need to be very, very careful about what we stir up. Because whoever that woman really is, she didn't just end up on this base by accident. Celine gets back to her room just as the sun is going down. The orange light streams through the tiny window, painting the walls like they're on fire. She sits on the edge of her bed, kicks off her shoes, and wiggles her toes. For the first time since she got here, she lets herself feel the sheer weight of it all. 7 years. It had been 7 years since Operation Hollow Mirror. 7 years since 12 members of her team were killed in an ambush that never should have happened. 7 years since she clawed her way out of the wreckage with 3 broken ribs and a bullet in her shoulder and crawled 2 miles to get picked up. She'd spent 7 years searching, hunting, and pretending to be someone else while she followed the trail of betrayal all the way back to the source. And now, that trail had led her right here, to this base, and to a man named Reich. He wasn't the big boss, she knew that. He was just a delivery boy, a pawn in a much bigger game. But pawns see things, pawns overhear things, and pawns can be flipped. She reaches into her bag and pulls out a small, scratched-up metal coin. One side had the logo of a unit that, officially, never existed. The other side had a motto engraved in Latin. She rubs her thumb over it, thinking of the faces of the men and women who carried coins just like it, people who trusted her, people who died because somebody sold them out. Tomorrow, the investigation would ramp up. Tomorrow, there would be more accusations. Tomorrow, Reich and his buddies would try to corner her. But tomorrow was also day 9. And on day 9, the tables were going to turn. She just had to make it through the night. The next morning is cold and gray. 2 military police officers escort Celine to the mess hall. They tell her it's for her own protection. But she knows it's really about humiliating her. She walks between the 2 guards, her head held high, looking straight ahead. Every single Marine in the room stops to stare as she passes. The whispers are just loud enough for her to hear. I heard she's a spy, probably selling secrets. Guess Reich was right about her. She grabs a breakfast tray, finds her usual spot by the wall, and eats standing up. About 10 minutes later, Reich strolls in. He walks right up to her, a smug look plastered all over his face. Well, well, look what we have here. The spy finally got busted. Celine just keeps eating, not even glancing at him. What's wrong? Cat got your tongue? He steps right into her personal space. You know, I always knew something was off about you. No normal woman stays that calm when people are messing with her. No regular civilian has files that are completely locked down. Still nothing. Reich's jaw clenches. Her silence is driving him crazy. Way more than any comeback could. Look at me when I'm talking to you! Celine finishes her coffee, puts the cup down, and finally looks him in the eye. Are you done, Sergeant? The exact same words she used a week ago. The same calm voice, the same patient look. Something inside Reich just snaps. He grabs her wrist, hard, and yanks her towards him. I asked you a question. Who are you? Who sent you? What do you really want? The whole mess hall goes dead silent. Even Reich's own friends look like he's gone too far. This was way over the line, getting physical with a civilian who was under investigation in front of a room full of witnesses. Celine doesn't fight back, doesn't even try to pull away. She just looks down at his hand, gripping her wrist, and then back up at his face. You should probably let go, Sergeant. Or what? You gonna report me? He lets out a nasty laugh. Who's gonna believe a spy over a Marine with 15 years of service? I wasn't thinking about reporting you. Then, what were you thinking about? She leans in, so close that only he can hear her whisper. I was thinking that you have absolutely no idea what you are touching. For just a split second, something flickers in Reich's eyes, not quite fear, but definitely doubt. Then he shoves her backward. She stumbles, but catches her balance. Get out of my mess hall and start packing your bags. By the end of today, you'll be off this base and out of my life for good. Celine just smooths out her shirt, picks up her tray, and drops it off at the collection point. She walks out of there without a single look back. But this time, something felt different. This time, she knew the end was near. The official notice came at 11:45 a.m. It was a high-priority message. Celine was ordered to appear before a full investigative tribunal at 1300 hours. All the evidence would be presented, and they would make a final decision about whether she could stay on the base. She reads it twice, then shuts her laptop. Back in her room, she changes into a clean, professional-looking dark blue blouse. She brushes her hair and looks at herself in the mirror. The woman looking back at her was the perfect picture of what she'd been pretending to be all week. A civilian contractor, totally in over her head. She was facing a machine she couldn't possibly beat, but under that quiet surface, something else was waking up. Celine opens her bag and takes out a small case. Inside is the one thing she hasn't touched since she arrived. Her real ID. She doesn't put it on, not yet, but she holds it for a second, feeling the weight of it in her hand. Soon, at 12:45 p.m., she walks over to the tribunal building. The MPs escort her, like always, but today it felt different. It was less like they were watching her and more like they were part of a ceremony. The hearing room this time is much bigger. A whole panel of officers is sitting behind a raised platform. Colonel Hendricks is leading it. Major Vaughn is there. And sitting in the front row with a very satisfied smirk on his face is Gunnery Sergeant Omar Reich. Celine goes to the defendant's table and stands there alone. Colonel Hendricks bangs the gavel. Dr. Celine Ardon, you are here to answer charges of security violations, unauthorized access to classified materials, and conduct unbecoming of a civilian contractor for the United States military. How do you plead? Celine stands up straight. Not guilty, Colonel. Very well. The prosecution may present its case. Major Vaughn gets to his feet. He spends the next 30 minutes laying out everything they have on her, the witness statements, the doctored access logs, the planted evidence, a whole pattern of so-called suspicious behavior. It sounds thorough, professional, and completely damning. When he's finally done, Colonel Hendricks looks over at Celine. The defendant may now present her defense. Celine stands up. She looks at the panel of officers, at Vaughn, and then right at Reich. Before I start, Colonel, I just have one question about procedure. Go on. Are all the key people involved in this investigation present in this room? Hendricks frowns a little. The relevant officers are here. Why? Because, Celine says, her voice ringing with confidence. I want to make sure that when the truth finally comes out, everyone who needs to hear it is sitting right here. A ripple of murmuring goes through the room. Reich's smirk starts to fade. Celine reaches up to the collar of her blouse, her fingers finding the top button. I've been called a spy, a security risk, and an infiltrator. She unfastens the top button of her uniform, then the next. Imagine being accused of a crime you didn't commit, cornered by people who want to see you fail. That's exactly where I found myself. They accused me of accessing places I shouldn't, of knowing things I had no right to know, and as the room fell silent, I knew it was time to show them the truth. You're right, I said, my voice cutting through the tension. I am not who I say I am. I pushed up my sleeve, past my wrist, revealing the black ink on my pale skin. It wasn't just any tattoo. It was the emblem of the Joint Special Reconnaissance Group, a unit so secret, most people in that room didn't even know it existed. And below it, the designation, SG-12. Reich's face drained of all color. Vaughn's jaw dropped. Colonel Hendricks shot halfway out of her seat, and right at that moment, the doors behind me swung open and 4 officers walked in. 4 generals with stars gleaming on their shoulders. These were the 4 highest-ranking military officials in the entire region. General Wesley Throne, General Evelyn Cross, General Harrison Renford, and General Andrew Yates. They marched down the center aisle in perfect formation as the entire room scrambled to its feet. Salutes snapped in the air, but when the 4 generals reached the front, they did something no one expected. In perfect unison, they turned to me and saluted me first. The room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop. I returned their salute with crisp precision. At ease, generals, I said quietly. I was just about to clear things up. General Throne stepped forward. His voice boomed through the silent room. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to introduce Commander Celine Ardon, SG-12 of the Joint Special Reconnaissance Group. Her security clearance is Red Omega, the highest classification that exists. He let that sink in. Every single person in this room, myself included, answers directly to her. Reich looked like he was about to faint. His face had gone from white to a sickly gray, and his hands were shaking uncontrollably. Colonel Hendricks finally found her voice. Commander, I had no idea. The accusations against you were fabricated. Yes, I finished for her. By someone in this room who had a very good reason to want me gone. My eyes locked onto Reich. Someone who didn't realize that their every move was being documented. Every secret conversation was being recorded. Every thread of their conspiracy was being traced right back to the source. Reich stumbled backward, shaking his head. No, he whispered. No, this is impossible. You're just a therapist. You're just... I'm the woman you shoved to the ground in the mess hall, I said, my voice calm and steady. I'm the woman you tried to frame for possessing contraband. I'm the woman you've spent the last week trying to destroy. I took a step closer to him, and I am the woman who is going to find out exactly who you've been working for, who you've been selling our secrets to, and what really happened to the 12 members of my unit who died because someone betrayed us 7 years ago. Reich's back hit the wall with a thud. I stopped right in front of him, looking at him with those same calm, patient eyes. So, Gunnery Sergeant Reich, I asked softly, are we done here, or would you like to continue? 2 hours later, when I walked into the mess hall, it was silent. Every single Marine stood at attention as I passed. No one threw food, no one blocked my path. I got my tray, picked out my food, and walked to the center of the room. This time, when I looked for a place to sit, a dozen chairs were pulled out for me. I picked the one right where Reich used to sit, with his cronies, sat down, and started to eat. Lieutenant Mercer came over, standing stiffly until I nodded for him to sit. Commander, I don't even know what to say. Then don't say anything, Lieutenant, I replied. Just eat. He sat down, picked up his fork, then put it back down. You knew, he said in disbelief. The whole time, you knew everything that was happening, and you just let it play out. I had to, I explained. The only way to catch the big fish was to let the little ones lead me to them. I took a sip of water. Reich is just a messenger. A pawn. He probably doesn't even know who he's really working for. But now that he's been caught, he'll talk. And when he does, I'll find the next link in the chain. The next link? He asked. My gaze drifted off. There's someone out there, a phantom we call Ghostline. 7 years ago, this person sold my unit's location to enemy forces. 12 people died that day. I was supposed to be number 13, but you survived. I survived. I confirmed. And I have spent every single day since then hunting for the person responsible. I looked back at Mercer. Reich is connected to Ghostline. I don't know how yet, but I'm going to find out. He didn't have to ask what would happen then. Later that evening, I met with the 4 generals in a secure communications room. General Throne did most of the talking. Ghostline is active again. We've intercepted messages that point to a major intelligence leak. Someone deep inside our own military is selling deployment plans, strategic assessments, everything. How major? I asked. Major enough to compromise 3 active operations. Major enough that people have already died, General Cross added, her voice tight. Celine, she continued, when we lost contact with you after Operation Hollow Mirror, we all thought you were dead. For 2 years, you were officially listed as killed in action. I had to disappear, I said. The only way to hunt a ghost is to become one yourself. I looked at each of them. And now, I'm back. And I'm going to finish what I started 7 years ago. General Yates nodded slowly. What do you need from us? Access, resources, and most important of all, trust. I'm going to be asking questions people don't want answered, investigating people who seem untouchable. If anyone tries to stop me, I paused. I need to know you'll have my back. The 4 generals looked at each other, and General Throne spoke for all of them. You have it, Commander. Whatever you need. I nodded, stood, and walked to the door. Commander, General Yates called out. I turned. One more thing. Be careful. Ghostline has avoided capture for 7 years. Whoever this person is, they're smart, they're connected, and they will do anything to stay hidden. My expression didn't change. So will I. Later that night, in my private quarters, I opened my encrypted laptop. A single message was waiting for me. There was no sender ID, no way to trace it, just 4 words. Welcome back, SG-12. I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I typed my reply. I never left. I closed the laptop, switched off the light, and lay there in the darkness. Tomorrow, the real hunt would begin. The interrogation room was bare, just concrete walls, a metal table, and 2 chairs bolted to the floor. Gunnery Sergeant Omar Reich sat in one of them, his wrists cuffed to the table. He looked pale, and his eyes kept darting toward the door. He'd been waiting for 47 minutes. Finally, the door opened, and I walked in, alone. I was carrying a single, thin folder. I placed it on the table and sat across from him. We sat in silence for a long moment before he finally broke. This is a mistake. I'm a 15-year veteran. I have 3 combat deployments, commendations. You can't just I can, I said quietly. And I am. I opened the folder, slid a photograph across the table. Do you recognize this place? Reich glanced at the image of a desert compound, littered with burnt-out vehicles. His jaw tightened. No, you should, I said. You were there. Operation Hollow Mirror. 7 years ago, you were assigned to the communications relay. That operation is classified. It was, I corrected him, until 12 people died because someone leaked their exact position to the enemy. I pulled out a second photo. This one showed bodies under tarps, soldiers standing in stunned silence. My unit, my people, wiped out in 13 minutes because someone told the enemy exactly where to find them. Reich's breathing became shallow and fast. I don't know what you're talking about. You were the communications relay, Sergeant, I pressed. Every single message that went in or out of that operation passed through you. I leaned forward, including the one that got my team killed. That's insane. I processed hundreds of messages. I had no idea what was in them. Maybe not, I conceded. But you knew who you were sending them to. I pulled out a third document, a communication log. This is a record of every encrypted transmission from your station during Hollow Mirror. Most of them went to authorized channels. But 3 of them, I tapped the paper. 3 went to an unlisted node, a ghost address that shouldn't even exist. Reich stared at the log, his face turning a deathly shade of gray. I want a lawyer. You're not under arrest. This isn't a criminal proceeding, I explained calmly. This is just a conversation between 2 people who were there when an operation went catastrophically wrong. My eyes bored into his. One of us lost everything that night. The other one walked away and built a career on the bodies of good soldiers. I didn't betray anyone, he shouted. Then explained the transmissions. I can't. Can't? Or won't? Reich's hands clenched into fists, the cuffs rattling against the table. You don't understand, he pleaded. There are people, powerful people. If I talk, I'm dead. My family is dead. Everyone I've ever known will be dead. I leaned back in my chair, studying him. You're already dead, Sergeant. The moment you sent those messages, you became a loose end. The only question now is whether you die as a traitor or as a witness. I closed the folder. Help me find the person who gave you those orders. Help me find Ghostline, and I will do everything in my power to keep you safe. Tears welled up in Reich's eyes, and his voice cracked. You can't protect me from this. I have survived 7 years of hunting shadows, I told him, my voice hard as steel. I have buried my friends. I have lost everything except this mission. She leans in close. Try me. The silence in the room feels heavy enough to crush you. 10 seconds pass, 20. Finally, the cuffed sergeant, Reich, breaks. I don't know who Ghostline is, I swear. All I know is the orders came from someone with stars on their collar. Someone high up who can make problems disappear without a trace. A general? He swallows, the sound echoing in the quiet room. Maybe, probably, the transmissions you found? I was just a mailman. I was told to pass them along, no questions asked. In return, good things happened. Promotions I didn't earn, assignments people would kill for. My record stayed squeaky clean, no matter what. Someone was protecting you, she states. No, Reich says, looking down at his hands. Someone owned me. I've been trying to get out for years, he confessed. Every time I think I'm free, they pull me back in. A text message, a favor they need, a little reminder that they know exactly where my sister lives, which school my nephew goes to. Celine pieced it together. It was a classic playbook for controlling an asset. Keep them scared, keep them dependent, and never let them know enough to become a real threat. The messages you've been sending from this base lately, who gets them? I don't know, he insisted. I send them to a dead drop. Someone picks them up. I never see a face. But someone on this base gives you those messages. Reich hesitates, then gives a tiny, terrified nod. Who? He glances at the door, the ceiling, everywhere, as if just saying the name out loud would be a death sentence. One of them, he whispers, his voice trembling. One of the generals. A chill shoots down Celine's spine. Which one? I don't know. They never show their face. But the clearance codes, only a general would have access to those kinds of protocols. The horrifying truth sinks in. One of the 4 generals who had saluted her just 2 hours ago was Ghostline. One of the men she had trusted with her entire mission was the very person who got her team slaughtered. Celine stands, her movements stiff, and walks to the door. She pauses. Thank you, Sergeant. Your cooperation will be noted. Wait! Reich's voice is full of desperation. What happens to me now? She doesn't turn around. That depends entirely on what you do next. The secure briefing room is empty when Celine enters. She called this meeting. All 4 generals, no aides, no one else. She has 45 minutes to unmask a traitor. General Throne arrives first, followed by Cross, then Renford, and finally Yates. They settle around the polished table, 4 of the most powerful military figures in the sector. 4 people who, on paper, answered to her. And one of them was a cold-blooded killer. Celine stands at the head of the table. In front of her is the folder from Reich's interrogation, files she's gathered over the past week, and 7 long years of evidence built on pure instinct. Thank you for coming, she starts. I'll make this quick. What's this all about, Commander? General Renford asks, his weathered face showing his impatience. He was the oldest, a career military man through and through. It's about Operation Hollow Mirror, Celine says, watching each of their faces for a flicker of a reaction. More specifically, it's about the intelligence leak that got my entire unit killed. General Cross shifts uncomfortably. Celine, we've gone over this. Every investigation concluded. Every investigation was compromised. Celine cuts her off, opening the folder. I have spent 7 years hunting the source of that leak. She pulls out a document, and now, I have proof. She slides the paper down the table. Communication logs, timestamps, routing codes. These are classified transmissions sent from this very base, funneled through a series of cutout addresses straight to foreign intelligence, she explains, letting the silence hang in the air. Someone in this room authorized them. The room is dead quiet. General Throne is the first to speak. Commander, those are some incredibly serious accusations. Do you have more than just logs? I have a witness, she says plainly. Gunnery Sergeant Reich has agreed to cooperate. He's been the go-between for these messages for years. And he's confirmed his handler uses general-level clearance codes. 4 faces, 4 different reactions. Throne looks deeply concerned. Cross seems troubled. Renford is visibly angry. And Yates looks calm. Way too calm. Celine locks her eyes on him. General Andrew Yates, 54 years old. He had a background in intelligence with 3 decades of service. General Yates, you were the intelligence liaison for Hollow Mirror. You had access to our operational coordinates. As did 50 other people, Yates replies smoothly, including Generals Throne and Cross right here. But you were the one who recommended the communication setup we used. You personally chose Sergeant Reich for that post. He was qualified. He was compromised, she shoots back, and you knew it. The air in the room turns to ice. Yates meets her gaze, unflinching. Commander Ardon, you went through something terrible. Losing your unit like that. That kind of loss can warp a person's judgment, make them see patterns that aren't there. Is that your professional opinion, General? It's an observation, he says calmly, based on decades of watching good officers crack under the weight of survivor's guilt. Celine doesn't even blink. I'm not broken, General. I'm focused. She pulls out another document. This is a financial analysis. Offshore accounts, shell corporations, money flowing from foreign governments to domestic accounts. She slides it across the table for all to see. One of those accounts belongs to a trust fund. The beneficiary is listed as A. Yates Jr., your son, General. For just a split second, the mask slips. Yates's jaw tightens. His eyes flash with something cold. The smooth composure is gone. That's circumstantial at best. Anyone could have what, General? Celine presses. Set up a secret trust fund in your son's name and funnel spy money into it? Celine shakes her head slowly. You are Ghostline. You've been selling out this country for at least a decade. And 7 years ago, you sold the location of my team to the people who ambushed us. Yates looks from the other generals to Celine, then to the door, as if calculating his chances. You're smart, he says finally. His voice has changed. The polished politician is gone, replaced by something much colder. You're just as smart as your father was, maybe even smarter. Celine freezes. My father? Oh yes, he figured it out too. 20 years ago got a little too close to the truth. Yates gives a smile that doesn't reach his eyes. A car accident, such a tragedy. And so, convenient. The words hit Celine like a physical blow. Her father had died when she was 12. A car wreck on a mountain road, no witnesses, no real explanation. It wasn't an accident. It was never an accident. You killed him. You arranged it. Does it really matter? Yates stands up slowly. What matters is that you made the same mistake he did. You came in here alone. You thought a folder full of evidence would be enough. He reaches into his jacket. It never is. His hand comes out holding a small detonator. This room is wired. Has been for years. A little insurance policy. His thumb rests on the trigger. In about 30 seconds, there's going to be another tragic accident. A gas leak, an explosion, 4 decorated generals and 1 heroic commander, all killed in the line of duty. General Throne lunges forward. Andrew, you can't. I can. I have. And I will again, Yates sneers, backing toward the door. The organization I work for is bigger than anything you can imagine. Taking me out won't stop a thing. It will just make them angry. Celine's mind races, calculating angles and odds. She has maybe 3 seconds. General Cross, she says, her voice low but firm. The ventilation panel behind you. Now, Cross doesn't ask why. She spins and kicks the panel clean off the wall. At the same moment, Celine moves. She grabs the heavy folder from the table and flings it right at Yates's face. It's not meant to hurt him, just to distract him. His thumb slams down on the detonator. Nothing happens. He looks at the device, confused, and presses it again. Still nothing. Celine gives him a grim smile. I found your explosives last night, she says. Disabled them this morning. My own little insurance policy. Yates's face twists into a mask of pure rage. He drops the useless detonator and his hand flies to the sidearm on his hip. But Celine is faster. She closes the distance in 2 long strides, grabbing his wrist before the gun is even out of the holster. She twists hard, applying pressure to the joint, and the pistol clatters to the floor. Yates swings an elbow at her head, but she ducks under it, driving her shoulder hard into his stomach. They slam against the wall. He's bigger and stronger, but she has been training for this exact moment for 7 years. She hooks his ankle, sweeping his legs out from under him, and he goes down hard. Before he can even think about getting up, she's on top of him, twisting his arm behind his back, her knee planted firmly on his spine. Andrew Yates, she says, her voice perfectly steady. You are under arrest for treason, espionage, and conspiracy to commit murder. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you. The door bursts open and military police swarm into the room. And right behind them, running on pure adrenaline, is Gunnery Sergeant Reich. He didn't run. He came back. Secure the prisoner, Celine orders, standing up and stepping away. As the MPs haul Yates to his feet and cuff him, he's still spitting threats. This changes nothing. Ghostline isn't one person, it's a network. Cut off one head, and 2 more will take its place. He laughs, a wild look in his eyes. You think you've won? You've just started a war you can't possibly finish. Celine walks right up to him, so close she can see the raw hatred in his eyes. Then I'll finish it, she says softly. 1 battle at a time. She nods to the MPs. Get him out of here. They drag him away, his voice echoing down the hall until a door slams shut, cutting him off. In the sudden silence, General Throne walks over to Celine. Commander, that was. I don't have the words. You don't need them, General, she replies. What I need is your support. Yates was right about one thing. This is just the beginning. Imagine being shoved to the ground, your career on the brink of ruin, all because you accused a powerful man of treason. Everyone thought she was crazy, but she was right. And this is the story of her vindication. If you believe in justice for the underdog, you need to hear this. As the traitor was led away, Celine turned to Sergeant Reich, the man who'd assaulted her just 9 days earlier. He stood awkwardly by the door. You came back, she said. Yes, Commander, he mumbled. Why? Reich could barely find the words. Because you were right, And if I didn't, I'd be just as much a monster as he is. Celine looked at him. Not just a bully anymore, but a pawn in a game he never even knew he was playing. Your help will be mentioned in the report, she told him. I'll push for a lighter sentence, but what comes next is out of my hands. He thanked her, but she cut him off. Don't thank me yet. The real work is just beginning. The next 72 hours were pure chaos. Yates's arrest sent shockwaves through the entire command. They tore through his files, his messages, his entire network. And the truth they found was horrifying. 15 years of secrets sold, dozens of missions blown, and a staggering number of lives lost. At least 40 confirmed casualties could be pinned directly on him, including the 12 soldiers in Celine's old unit, including her own father. The investigation ballooned. More traitors were flushed out of the woodwork. Some ran, others were caught. A few, like Reich, decided to talk to save their own skin. His testimony was a goldmine, helping to expose 3 more spy rings hidden within the military. He gave up names, dates, and secret codes. He was still going to face a court-martial, no doubt about it, but his willingness to help would definitely earn him some points. On the 4th day, the real changes started. Colonel Riss rolled out brand new security rules, tougher background checks, and even an anonymous tip line, making sure something like this could never happen again. General Throne ordered a massive audit of every single intelligence operation Yates had ever touched, looking for more signs of his betrayal. Meanwhile, General Cross took personal charge of creating a new counterintelligence squad, a team of hunters whose only job was to track down the last ghosts in Yates' network. The entire atmosphere on the base shifted. The petty rivalries and office politics vanished, replaced by a cold, serious focus. The knowledge that a snake had been living in their midst had sobered everyone up. On the 5th day, Celine walked into the mess hall for the last time. As she stepped inside, the entire room went dead silent. But this time, it wasn't a silence of hostility. It was a silence of respect. Every single soldier in that room, from the lowest private to the highest officer, got to their feet. Celine walked to the very center of the room, to the exact spot where Reich had thrown her to the floor just 10 days before. She looked at the faces around her, all of them now standing at attention for the woman they had once called weak. At ease, she said softly. As they sat, their eyes never left her. Most of you never really knew me, she began. You only knew the cover story, the civilian therapist who didn't fit in. But that woman was just a mask. She was a tool to get me inside, she continued, her voice clear and strong. I needed to get close. I needed time. And most of all, I needed the people who betrayed this country to feel so safe and comfortable that they'd start making mistakes. She scanned the room again. Some of you helped make my life here difficult. You were following orders from someone you trusted. I don't blame you for that. Loyalty is a good thing, but blind loyalty? That's a poison. She let her words hang in the air. What happened here proves that the biggest threats don't always come from our enemies overseas. Sometimes they wear our uniform and eat at our table. Your duty is to defend our country. My duty is to defend you while you do it. And that means hunting down the people who would sell your lives to the highest bidder. Her posture straightened, radiating authority. You won't always see me. You might not even know I'm here. But I am always out there, working. And if anyone ever threatens this base again, she let the sentence hang, unfinished. She didn't have to say another word. If this story of justice resonates with you, share it with a friend who needs to hear that the truth will always come out. And make sure you're following, because the hunt for Hollowmere is only just beginning. That night, Celine stood with General Cross in a secure briefing room. The general looked exhausted, like she'd aged a decade in a few days. But her eyes held a new, unbreakable hardness. Commander, she said, I need to apologize. For what, General? For not seeing it? Yates and I were colleagues for 15 years. I would have trusted that man with my life. She shook her head in disgust. And all that time, he was a traitor. He was good at hiding, Selene replied. It's how he lasted so long. That's no excuse. I should have suspected something, Cross insisted, finally meeting Celine's gaze. But you did. With all his power, his influence, you were the one who caught him. How? Celine thought for a moment. I stopped looking for clues and started looking for a pattern. Yates was meticulous about erasing his tracks, but he couldn't erase his own personality, she explained. His ego, his absolute certainty that he was the smartest person in any room, that was his flaw. She paused. Men like that always underestimate their opponents. They think they're untouchable, and sooner or later, that arrogance becomes their biggest weakness. And now? Cross asked. Now, Celine said, we follow the breadcrumbs he left behind. Every secret contact, every hidden payment. Somewhere in all that data, we'll find the next piece of his network. Cross nodded, then turned to a large screen on the wall. There's something you need to see. An image popped up. A top secret file. Project designation. Hollow Mirror, Phase 2. We found this on one of Yates's hidden drives. It took our best people days to crack the encryption. As Celine read the summary, a cold dread washed over her. Hollow Mirror wasn't just one traitor's spy ring. It was a massive, long-term program to infiltrate the highest levels of the military. Phase 2, she whispered. It's something bigger, something that hasn't started yet. What is it? Celine asked, her voice tense. We don't know for sure. The file is mostly code names, coordinates, and a countdown. Cross pointed to a line of text. But we know one thing. Whatever it is, it's set to launch within the next few weeks. Celine's eyes locked onto the coordinates. They pointed to another base, one that was larger and far more critical. I have to go there, she stated. I figured you'd say that. Cross slid a folder across the table. Your travel orders and full clearance. Everything you'll need. Celine picked it up. General, what Yates said about my father. Cross's gaze softened. I knew your father. He was a good man. And yes, there were always whispers about his death. Unanswered questions. She looked Celine in the eye. Until now. Cross placed a hand on her shoulder. Go find the answers you're looking for, Commander. And when you find the people responsible, make them pay. Celine gave a single, sharp nod. That's the plan. The next morning, as she was doing one last check of her empty quarters, there was a knock on the door. It was Lieutenant Mercer. He seemed different now, more sure of himself. Commander, I heard you were heading out. News travels fast around here, she replied. I just wanted to say, he stammered for a moment, thank you for trusting me when I started poking around. You were asking the right questions, Lieutenant. That's a rare quality. I also wanted to ask, he hesitated again, is there anything I can do to help with whatever is coming next? Celine sized him up. This young officer, the one person who sensed something was wrong when no one else did. There might be, she said slowly, but it would mean stepping into a world with no safety net. A world where the good guys and the bad guys don't always wear different uniforms. I understand, he said. Are you sure? Because once you go down that road, there's no turning back. It changes everything. Mercer's gaze was unwavering. Commander, I saw a traitor almost bring this base to its knees. I saw good people get played and hurt. He stood taller. If there's a chance to stop that from ever happening again, I want in. Selene made up her mind. I'll be in touch, Lieutenant. When the time is right, I'll be ready. He stepped aside as she shouldered her bag and walked toward the door. Commander? She turned back. That night in my office, before you revealed who you were, you smiled. You had this look like you knew a secret no one else did. What was it? Celine allowed herself a small smile, deciding he'd earned the truth. I knew, she said, that you were exactly the kind of person this base needed. Someone who still believed in fighting for the truth, even when it was easier not to. She looked him straight in the eyes. Don't ever lose that, Lieutenant. It's more valuable than you know. Before he could reply, she was gone. At the main gate, a transport was waiting. Celine stopped for a moment, looking back at the base that had been her battleground for the last 11 days. So much had been settled. A traitor was caught. A network was shattered. But so much more was just beginning. But the fight was far from over. A file labeled Phase 2 pointed to something bigger, a danger that dwarfed everything she'd faced before. After 7 years, her secret war was just entering its next stage, and somewhere in those shadows, new enemies were already waiting. As she turned back to her ride, she saw Sergeant Reich leaning against it, a crutch supporting his weight. His leg had been busted up in the chaos of taking Yates down, not critical, but bad enough. "Sergeant," she said, "I didn't figure I'd see you out here." I had to," he stammered. "I wanted to apologize the right way for everything." "You already did," she reminded him. "I know, but that was for the record." He looked down at the dusty ground. This is for me." Celine simply waited. "Back in the mess hall, when I shoved you, I thought I was just protecting my turf, keeping things the way they'd always been," he confessed, the words catching in his throat. "I had no idea about you, about what was really going on, or about the kind of man I'd let myself become. Now I know, and I'm just ashamed." He finally met her gaze. "You saved my life. When Yates rigged that room to blow, you could have left me to die. It would have been simpler, cleaner, but you didn't." "That's not who I am," she said quietly. "I know," he choked out, "and that just makes it worse." He tried to stand straighter, leaning on his crutch. "I'm not asking you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. All I'm asking for is a chance to be better, to do better." Celine studied him for a long, silent moment. "What the tribunal decides is out of my hands, Sergeant. I can't influence that. But I can tell you this." She took a step closer to him. "Everyone deserves a chance to be better. It's what you do with that chance that defines you." She held out her hand. Reich stared at it for a second, then took it in a firm shake. "Thank you, Commander." "Don't thank me," she said. "Prove me right." She let go and walked to the vehicle, pulling the door open. "Commander!" Reich called out one last time, and she paused. "Whoever this ghost line is, whoever's pulling all the strings, when you get to them, yes?" He locked eyes with her. "Make them pay. For all of us." Celine didn't smile or even nod. She just looked at him with those steady, patient eyes that had witnessed so much loss, betrayal, and darkness. "That's the only plan there is." She slipped into the vehicle, and the door shut with a solid thud as the engine turned over. As the base shrank in the rearview mirror, Celine flipped open her laptop. The encrypted file was there, waiting for her. Hollow mirror. Phase 2. A set of coordinates pulsed on the screen, a destination, a new mission, a new front, in a war that had started 7 years ago, with no end in sight. She thought of her father, of the truth she'd finally uncovered, and the justice she'd served to Yates. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough until the entire network was torn out by the roots. Until every last traitor answered for what they'd done. Until the shadows that had consumed her unit, her father, and so many others were finally burned away by the truth. Her phone buzzed a message on a secure channel. Phase 2. Assets are in position. Awaiting your arrival. She typed back a simple reply. On my way, ETA 6 hours. The vehicle picked up speed, heading for the airfield, for the next fight, for the next shadow. Behind her, the base was already changing. New rules, a new sense of caution, a new understanding of the enemy within. The damage from Yates's betrayal would linger for years, but it would also forge a stronger, more resilient force, one that was harder to break. And up ahead, the unknown was waiting. More enemies, more secrets, and more battles in a war that never really slept. Celine closed the laptop, leaned her head against the seat, and shut her eyes, giving herself exactly 60 seconds of peace. Then her eyes snapped open, and she began to review the mission brief for Phase 2. Justice never rests, and neither could she. Epilogue, 48 hours later. In the secure server room at Camp Lejeune, a lone technician was running routine diagnostics on the empty racks. A small notification popped up on his monitor, an automated security flag. Someone had accessed a highly restricted file. He pulled up the log. The file was designated Hollow Mirror Archive. The access point was internal, from a terminal that had no business having that level of clearance. He picked up his phone to report the breach, but the lights flickered and died. 3 seconds later, they hummed back to life. The notification on his screen was gone. The security log was wiped clean. The file showed no trace of ever being accessed. The technician blinked, staring at the screen. Everything looked perfectly normal. With a shrug, he went back to his work. Deep within the system, a hidden program silently finished its task, sending a forward message to an untraceable destination. SG-12 has left base. And in a place that didn't exist on any map, someone read those words and began to prepare. The hunt was on from both sides. Every scar tells a story, but most are never heard. Listen closely. Thank you for sticking with us to the end. Be sure to subscribe to MVB Stories so you don't miss what happens next.